She was a U.S. Coast Guard officer left for dead, ambushed at sea, her crew gone, her body broken. The storm hurled her onto the jagged shores of Matagorda Island, Texas, bleeding, unconscious, and alone. But fate had other plans. Not a rescue team, not a miracle from the sky. A lone German shepherd heard the waves, and beside him, a retired Navy SEAL who thought he'd left war behind. Together, they pulled her from the tide. But just as hope flickered, the real enemy landed, and they didn't come to rescue her. They came to finish the job. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The sea still held the weight of the storm, and the sky above Matagorda Island glowed a pale, bruised gray. Sarah Quinn was 34, tall and lean, with a strong, wiry frame built from years of physical endurance on the ocean. Her skin was wind-burnished and sun-kissed, her jawline angular, lips firm even in pain. Her dark auburn hair was cropped just above her shoulders, now plastered to her face in salty, tangled strands. A long scar traced the edge of her left brow, a remnant of a search and rescue mission gone wrong 2 summers ago. But it did little to dull the sharpness of her gaze. That gaze, however, was vacant now. She was unconscious, sprawled at the tide's edge like wreckage. Her right hand was twisted beneath her, her left chained to a black waterproof Pelican case with military-grade shackles. The case dragged behind her like an anchor, half submerged, splattered with sand and blood. Waves lapped against her boots, nudging her higher up the beach. Each rise of water pulled her uniform tighter around her battered body, revealing dark red patches that bled through the fabric. Her breathing was shallow, ragged. She wasn't dead. Not yet. The first to notice her was Scout. He was a German shepherd, 5 years old, coat thick and dappled black and tan. The fur across his chest, a pale gold that shimmered damp in the light. He moved with precision and intent, his muscular frame still as alert as the day he graduated from combat training. Though technically retired, Scout had not forgotten how to search, how to protect, or how to signal when something wasn't right. He stopped, ears pricked forward, tail stiff behind him. The scent was blood, salt, metal, and something else, familiar. Not from memory, but from instinct. Scout let out a low, deep bark, not the kind meant to scare coyotes from the bush or warn seagulls off the roof. This was a call, a signal, an alarm. Logan Pierce heard it from halfway down the trail. He stepped from the underbrush slowly, every movement economical. Logan was 39, tall and broad-shouldered, his presence quiet but undeniable. His skin bore the tan of the Gulf sun, but his face was the kind that had been shaped more by loss than by weather. A thick, dark beard masked the angles of his jaw, shot through with threads of gray, matching the short-cropped hair that clung to his scalp. A long, thin scar ran across his left forearm, self-stitched in a desert in 2011. His boots were scarred, and so were his hands. He moved like a man who had once run toward fire, and now avoided it at all costs. "Scout," he muttered, voice low and gravel rough, not from disuse but disinterest in talking. But as soon as he reached the shepherd's side, his eyes sharpened. There, half buried in kelp and soaked sand, was a woman. An officer, clearly. He saw the insignia on the collar, barely visible beneath bloodstains and salt crust. The cuffed case caught his attention next. His gut clenched. He crouched, placing a hand to her neck. Pulse. weak but steady. He peeled back an eyelid. Concussed. Maybe worse. He looked at the surf line creeping closer. "We don't have time, girl," he said to the unconscious woman. Then to Scout, "Help me." The dog stepped closer. Logan slipped his arms beneath her shoulders, wincing as he felt the dead weight of her body. Not from weakness, but from the limpness of someone who had fought long and hard before succumbing. Scout moved to the opposite side and nudged the case free of the sand, nosing it higher. The man and the dog moved together like old teammates, one dragging, one pushing. She moaned once, weakly, as her body hit a root. Logan winced but didn't stop. They made it halfway up the trail to the cabin before Logan had to stop. He breathed in deeply, nostrils flaring. She was bleeding through her side, possibly internal, still clutching the case. Logan hadn't seen a military case like that since Kandahar. He stared at it for a second, then shifted her weight and pressed forward. The cabin stood at the tree line, weathered pine, salt-stained windows, the front steps crooked from erosion. A homemade wind chime knocked against the porch railing, made from brass shell casings and a bit of driftwood. Logan kicked open the door and carried her inside, laying her gently onto the thick wool blanket by the fireplace. Scout stood beside her, ears twitching. He removed her boots, then unbuckled the soaked tactical vest, his hands careful but swift. The wound was clean, jagged, but no shrapnel. She'd bled a lot, but not fatally. Yet. He opened his field med kit, still stocked. It had stayed untouched for nearly 2 years, until now. Logan pressed gauze against the wound and taped her ribs tight, watching her face for signs of consciousness. Nothing. He poured water into a tin cup and soaked a cloth, wiping salt and sand from her cheeks. The fever would come soon. He knew the signs. He sat back on his heels and stared at her. "What the hell happened to you?" he whispered. But he didn't expect an answer. He stood, eyes flicking toward the case still cuffed to her wrist. It was military-grade encryption, and judging by the look of her, this wasn't a simple accident. Someone wanted her dead. Someone who'd been willing to sink a Coast Guard vessel to make it happen. Logan sighed and reached for the wood stove, lighting it with a match from the drawer. As the room warmed, he looked once more at the unconscious woman. Her brow twitched. Her lips moved, breath catching. "Mason," she murmured. Scout tilted his head. Logan stared. "Well," he muttered, sitting beside the fireplace and loading his rifle with calm, practiced fingers. "Guess you're not just a castaway." And outside, through the still-hanging mist, something darker than rain moved offshore. The wind had died down by morning, leaving behind only the hiss of distant waves and the low rustling of wet palms outside the cabin. The storm had passed, but the pressure in the air still hung heavy, as if nature itself was holding its breath. Inside, the warmth of the small wood stove pulsed outward, battling the lingering dampness clinging to the cabin walls. The fire had not gone out all night. Sarah Quinn stirred beneath the wool blanket, her forehead glazed with a thin sheen of sweat. Her skin had paled from blood loss, her lips dry and cracked, and her breathing remained unsteady, shallow. The fever had taken hold some time before dawn. Now her body trembled beneath layers of cotton, her head tossing weakly against the pillow, hair matted to her scalp. Beside her lay Scout. The German shepherd had not moved from her side since she was placed there. His front paws crossed, head resting forward, ears twitching at each ragged breath. The light from the stove danced in his intelligent eyes, warm brown, but never dull. Trained to respond to subtle changes in breathing, posture, and scent, he now watched her with the same unwavering intensity he'd once reserved for patrol missions in Afghanistan. 5 years old, muscles still lean, his right ear slightly nicked from an old fight. He radiated focus. He hadn't needed orders. He had chosen to stay. Logan sat at the corner of the room, slouched in the only wooden chair that hadn't been salvaged from scrap. His forearms rested on his thighs, his head down, hands stained with dried antiseptic and rust-colored blood. The sleeves of his dark thermal shirt were pushed up past his elbows, revealing arms corded with sinew and faded scars. His eyes were bloodshot, not from lack of sleep, but from memory. He'd tended wounds before, battlefield wounds. But this was different. He had left the world for a reason. Left behind people, missions, noise. He hadn't planned on finding anyone on this island, let alone pulling a half-dead woman from the Gulf. And yet here she was, an officer with a case worth killing for, a case she still hadn't let go of, even in unconsciousness. Sarah murmured something under her breath. He rose, crossed the room silently, and knelt beside her. Her hands twitched, her lips moving. Mason. The name again. Last night she'd said it in her sleep. This time her voice cracked. Caleb. No, wait. She jerked slightly, as though recoiling from something invisible. Logan laid a calloused hand gently on her shoulder and reached for the damp cloth on the table. He wrung it out and dabbed it across her forehead, wiping away sweat. It's just fever, he muttered, more to himself than her. Get him out, she gasped suddenly, eyes still closed, her hand clawing weakly at the blanket. Mason, he's bleeding. Diaz. Then she snapped upright with a choking gasp, eyes wide open but clouded in confusion. Her body trembled as she took in her surroundings, the wood ceiling, the stove, the rifle on the wall, and finally, the man kneeling next to her. Her breath caught again, and instinct flared behind her eyes. She reached for her hip. Nothing there. Her weapon was gone. Her limbs shook. You're safe, Logan said calmly. You're not under attack. She stared at him, disoriented. Then at Scout. The dog made no move. He simply looked up at her, tail thumping once against the floorboards, a soft sound in the quiet room. It was that thump that broke something in her. She blinked, breath still ragged, and reached out toward the dog. Scout sniffed her fingers, then gently pressed his head into her palm. You're not a dream, she whispered hoarsely. No, Logan replied. You're not dreaming, and you're not dead. Though it was close. She closed her eyes, letting her hand rest against Scout's fur. Logan moved back to the chair, giving her space. Where am I? She asked after a long pause. Matagorda Island, South Shoreline. I found you yesterday. You washed up with that, he said, nodding toward the black case still attached to her wrist. Still cuffed. She followed his gaze, noticing it again. Her body tensed. I need that case. Figured. I didn't touch it. She eyed him now, truly saw him. The man was large, his presence quiet but formidable. His face bore the wear of someone who had seen too much and spoken about too little. His beard was trimmed but not neat. His shirt had once been black, but time and salt air had faded it. There was no softness in his stance, no apology in his tone. But there was no threat either. "Who are you?" she asked. "Logan Pierce," he said simply. "Retired. Navy SEAL." Her eyes narrowed. "You live here?" He nodded. "Alone?" He looked toward Scout. "Not quite." Sarah exhaled, slumping back. The pain had returned, radiating from her ribs, blooming through her side like fire. Her hand instinctively went to the wound, now bound tightly beneath layers of gauze and pressure bandage. She remembered the explosion, the screams, the water, then darkness. "Thank you," she said softly. Logan nodded once, accepting it, but not needing it. Outside, the sun finally broke through the clouds, casting light through the salt-smeared window panes. Scout shifted, then laid his head across Sarah's leg. She didn't flinch, and for the first time since she'd washed ashore, Sarah Quinn felt the edges of safety. The air still smelled of salt and damp earth. By the third day since the storm, the island had shed its chaos, but not its silence. Matagorda's beaches, normally forgotten by maps and men, now bore unfamiliar footprints, heavy, deep, too wide apart to be casual hikers. Logan Pierce crouched beside one of them, fingers brushing the compacted sand. He didn't say a word. Scout, the German shepherd at his side, had gone still. Tail low, ears forward, nose working. Something was wrong. The wind shifted, and with it came the scent of oil, sweat, and metal. Sarah Quinn stood several feet behind, her left arm still cradled across her ribs. Though she was tall and slim with copper-brown hair now pulled back tightly to keep it off her fevered neck, there was no fragility in the way she moved. Her body was marked by strain, but her spine remained upright. Freckles dotted her pale cheeks, and the shadows under her eyes hadn't faded since the night of the explosion. Still, the storm hadn't taken her resolve. She gripped the case, still cuffed to her wrist, with silent purpose. They'd followed the string of camera traps Logan had hidden along the east-facing edge of the shoreline. Mostly built from repurposed trail cams and military scrap, the traps weren't high-end surveillance, but they didn't need to be. What they saw in the images made Sarah's blood run cold. 3 men, all armed. 2 carried suppressed carbines slung across their chests. The third wore tactical webbing and radio comms that marked him as command. Their boots weren't local, soles designed for urban and terrain transition, not beachwear. Even their posture screamed experience. Clean angles, fast steps, no wasted motion. Sarah didn't need names. She'd seen the type before. These weren't mercenaries. These were specialists. She knelt beside Logan, who was already sketching a map into the sand with the edge of a stick. "They're not just here to kill me," she said. He glanced at her, then back at the grainy printout in his hand. "No, they're here for what's in that case." She hesitated. Her fingers brushed the lock. Inside are copies of transportation manifests, encrypted payout ledgers, and GPS coordinates to what we think are at least 3 drop zones along the Gulf. Arms and human trafficking routes. They stretch from Louisiana ports down to Veracruz. I was escorting the case to a federal task force base near Galveston. We got hit before we ever crossed into airspace. My team didn't stand a chance. "And the list of names?" Logan asked without looking up. She nodded. "Some of them are elected. Some wear stars on their shoulders. I wasn't supposed to read the data, but Mason did. That's why they hit us. He grunted. That makes sense. That's also why they're sweeping the beach. They can't let it walk. Scout gave a sharp bark, not loud, but pointed. Logan rose at once, gaze shifting to the mangrove edge. There, not far, he muttered. Sarah scanned the tree line. Then we move now. Logan wiped the sand map clean and picked up a weathered notebook from the rock. Inside were sketched trails, some carved from memory, others updated over the years of living as a ghost. We'll go west. There's a salt marsh too shallow to cross without exposing yourself, but there's a mangrove corridor here, choked and slow but hidden. Past that is Falcon's Ridge. If we reach it by dusk, we'll have height, visibility, and only one slope they can approach from. We set traps there. We wait. She looked toward the sky. Gray clouds still lingered, but the worst of the storm was gone. Now came the press of humidity, the weight of stillness before heat returned. What kind of traps? She asked. Logan glanced at her wrist. You ever worked with Liana Spinoza? Sarah blinked. The hooked vine? Sticky as sin, sharp enough to slice leather. There's a patch near the ridge. If we set it right, they'll bleed before they fire. She didn't argue. Back at the cabin, Logan opened an old army footlocker. Inside, a flare gun with 3 rounds, a machete with a chipped handle, his old .30-06 Winchester, cleaned and oiled with almost ritual care, and a handful of knives, 1 curved, 2 straight, all sharpened within the last month. Scout watched him assemble the gear with the quiet familiarity of a veteran dog, tail still, muscles tight. Sarah sat beside the fire, checking the tension on her hastily stitched wound. She winced, but didn't complain. You're favoring your left side, Logan said without looking up. I can shoot just fine. You'll need to. Once we're up there, we don't come back down. She stood slowly, strapping the machete to her belt. Then we finish it up there. By late afternoon, the 3 of them, man, woman, and dog, moved into the brush. Sarah carried the flare gun and a sidearm from Logan's footlocker. Logan bore the Winchester slung over his shoulder, machete in hand. Scout led, ears low, every step purposeful. As they reached the base of Falcon's Ridge, the mangroves behind them swallowed the trail in shadow, and somewhere behind, 3 ghosts in combat boots continued their silent approach toward secrets, blood, and a woman they thought would be easy to erase. They had no idea. The ridge breathed silence, broken only by the distant cry of gulls and the wet shuffle of boots through the marshy slope below. Logan Pierce knelt at the crest of Falcon's Ridge, his body pressed to the earth. Winchester .30-06 nestled against his shoulder. A light sheen of sweat glazed his forehead despite the lingering chill in the wind. His breath slowed, controlled, eyes sharp beneath furrowed brows and salt and pepper stubble. Every muscle in his body had learned to wait, to still, to strike with purpose. That old discipline had returned, not with pride, but necessity. Behind him, Sarah Quinn crouched low against a stone outcrop, shoulder bandaged in layered cloth already browning with blood. She gritted her teeth as she adjusted her posture, her copper hair tied in a tight knot beneath a borrowed field cap, eyes flicking between the slope and Logan's rifle sights. She'd handed off lead shooter responsibility without hesitation. Her left side throbbed from earlier impact, and though she was no stranger to combat, she knew the weight of precision belonged to the steadier hands today. Scout led the formation ahead, weaving like shadow between tufts of palmetto and patches of sharp sea sedge. At 5 years old, The German shepherd had matured into a full-bodied sentinel, his lean frame wired with instinct, motionless 1 second and gone the next. He stopped now, ears perked, head low, nose angled into the breeze. Then a short, clipped growl. Logan's finger hovered on the trigger. "They're close," Sarah whispered. "Real close. That bark's a hard alert." He nodded, voice low. "Which flank?" She lifted a pair of compact binoculars, tracing the eastern slope, then pivoted. "Not the mangrove. Northwest ridge. 3, moving low. They avoided the vine trap." "Of course they did," Logan muttered. "Professionals." They had set the perimeter carefully. Lines of thorned liana spinosa looped through brush, flare tripwires along the ridgeline, and a false trail that ended in unstable sand. But these men weren't amateurs. They hadn't taken the trail. Scout returned in a blur, skidding into the brush beside Sarah. His side brushed against her leg, the gesture subtle but grounding. She patted him once, eyes still tracking movement. The first of the attackers emerged, a man in desert camo, cropped blonde hair, and a jaw like a brick wall. His name was Ty Briggs, and Logan recognized the stance before the face. Short-range breacher, aggressive, predictable. Ty raised his weapon to scan the ridge. That was his mistake. Logan's rifle cracked once. A heartbeat later, Ty's body crumpled backward, legs giving way before his mind registered death. "Target down," Logan murmured. Sarah reloaded for him, her fingers trembling slightly from the recoil of adrenaline and blood loss. She bit the inside of her cheek, fighting the haze forming at the edges of her vision. Movement. Another silhouette. Taller, broader, barreling up the hill fast. "Briggs was cover," Sarah hissed. "That's their hammer." The second attacker, Briggs's partner, Kurt Briggs, had gone down, so this had to be Vance, launched forward with brute momentum. He didn't fire. He charged. Logan swung the rifle left, steady hands, 2 sharp shots. The first clipped Vance's side, spinning him. The second dropped him into the undergrowth with a grunt that snapped the air. Then came the silence, the kind that usually followed death, until it didn't. A boot scraped stone. Sarah turned. Too late. From the blind side of the cliff, the final man, Vance unmistakably, had scaled the vertical rocks with the grace of a seasoned operative. Tall, lean, and cruel-eyed beneath a soot-smeared face, he dragged Sarah back against his chest with a knife pressed to her throat. The cuffed case hung from her wrist like dead weight. "Drop it," Vance snarled toward Logan. "You fire, she bleeds." Logan didn't move. His knuckles whitened on the rifle stock. "Open the case," Vance barked to Sarah. "Now!" Sarah's breath hitched. Her fingers twitched, but not toward the lock. Toward her hip. Scout moved first. The shepherd launched from the shadows like a bolt of vengeance, jaws clamping down on Vance's forearm with explosive force. The man roared in pain, gun arm flailing, knife slicing across air. A shot rang out, too close. Then a yelp, low, sharp. Scout dropped. Sarah screamed. The pain, the fear, the fury coalesced into instinct. Her hand closed around the flare gun tucked into her waistband. She twisted in Vance's grip, the muzzle slamming upward, fired point blank into his neck. The flare burst into blinding magnesium flame, igniting his scream into something animal. Logan surged forward, slamming his shoulder into Vance's chest, sending them both reeling toward the edge. Vance's screams vanished mid-fall. Then came the sound of something breaking far below. Bone, maybe, or fate. Smoke coiled in the air. Sarah crawled to Scout, who lay motionless, blood seeping from a wound high on his shoulder. She pressed both hands down, crying out hoarsely. Logan dropped to one knee beside her, stripping his own shirt for pressure dressing, face unreadable. "We need help," she whispered. "I'll get it." Logan rose, stepping over the scorched grass, reached the fallen enemy's radio, still crackling faintly with static. "Mayday," he growled into the mic. "Broken Arrow. 3 hostiles down. Coast Guard asset alive but critical. I repeat, Broken Arrow. Coordinates transmitting now." As he turned back, his eyes locked with Sarah's. Smoke, blood, salt, and the aching silence of the cliff's edge. Salt clung to the air like memory as the first light of dawn spilled over Matagorda Island, painting the mangroves and dunes in gentle hues of copper and rose. Logan Pierce crouched in the dirt beside a makeshift triage zone just off the ridge, the tang of blood, magnesium, and sea mist still thick in his lungs. His large hands, scarred and trembling ever so slightly now that the adrenaline had drained, pressed a fresh dressing to Sarah Quinn's wound. Her shoulder was slick with sweat and smeared antiseptic, but she no longer trembled. Beneath the grime and the exhaustion, her green eyes stayed sharp, locked on Scout's body a few feet away. The German shepherd's chest rose and fell, shallow but steady. His black and tan coat was matted with blood where the bullet had torn through the muscle near his front shoulder, but the exit wound was clean. He would live, but only if help came fast. Logan's thumb hit the transmit button on the radio scavenged from Ty's vest. "Mayday, Mayday, Broken Arrow, Coast Guard officer alive, repeat. Critical but stable. K9 wounded, hostile force neutralized. Sending coordinates now." There was no reply at first, just static and the faint crackle of distant frequencies. Sarah, propped against a rock, watched him with a distant calm. Her face, normally composed, almost guarded, now showed something raw. Not weakness, acceptance. She had seen death and known its breath at her throat. She had also seen who stood between her and the dark. Him, the man with the quiet eyes and the steady hands, and the dog that wouldn't let her die. The response came 11 minutes later. A clipped voice, female, calm, efficient. "Copy Broken Arrow, Pave Hawk inbound, ETA 2 hours. Prepare landing zone and patient transfer." They moved slowly. Logan used a machete to clear a patch of open sand near the western bluff, then marked the area with a flare strip and bright cloth from a torn enemy pack. He returned to check Scout's pulse, adjusting the pressure wrap. The dog whined softly. Logan whispered, "You did good, buddy. Just hang on." Sarah, watching from beneath the shaded tarp he'd rigged, asked, "You ever get used to watching them bleed?" He glanced at her. "No, but you get better at not falling apart until they stop." She nodded, then looked away. The wind stirred her blood-matted hair, reddish-brown, thick, coiled at the nape from sweat. Her olive skin was paler than usual. In her hand, she still held the chain that linked the briefcase to her wrist. The case, blood-stained and dented, sat untouched beside her. What it carried had nearly killed them. And yet, it would save many more. 2 hours later, the whir of rotor blades split the quiet. The HH-60 Pave Hawk crested over the southern dune line like a gray-winged beast, sending sand and salt swirling in every direction. Logan shielded his eyes. The side door opened mid-hover, and 2 figures descended fast via ropes. A rescue team, U.S. Air Force pararescue specialists. Armored, quick, precise. One was Staff Sergeant Nikki Reyes, late 20s, Latina, sharp cheekbones and sharper eyes. She knelt beside Sarah without hesitation, scanning the wound and signs of infection. "She's lucky," Reyes said to Logan while administering stabilizers. "Whoever did the initial triage knew what the hell they were doing." "She's luckier because of him," Sarah murmured, nodding toward Scout. Reyes turned. "K9's strong. Entry and exit clean. He's a fighter." They lifted Sarah onto a gurney as the medevac team secured the briefcase. Logan helped guide Scout into a padded transport cage modified for injured working dogs. As the Pavehawk's turbines ramped up again, Reyes tapped Logan on the shoulder. "You coming?" she asked. He looked at the ridge, at the island quieting behind them. "No." Sarah, from the gurney, held out a small object, a silver trident pin from her vest. "You deserve this." Logan stepped back. "I already left that life." She shook her head. "No. You left the war, but not the oath." Then quieter. "You owe Scout. And yourself. Just live well." He didn't reply, just watched as the helicopter lifted, carrying her and the dog into the morning sun. The wind returned once they were gone, warm, soft, carrying with it the scent of crushed herbs and wet earth. Logan stood on Falcon's Ridge alone again, but not unchanged. Below him, the sea reached for the shore with gentle fingers. Matagorda Island had witnessed war, but now it would remember peace. For 3 broken souls, the storm was over, the tide had turned, and a new chapter had begun. Sometimes, miracles don't come with halos or choirs. Sometimes, they come with mud-caked boots, trembling hands, and the bark of a loyal dog echoing through salt, heavy winds. On that forgotten island, beneath the shadow of storm-broken clouds, 3 lives collided not by chance, but by purpose. A dying officer, a broken soldier, and a dog who refused to let death win. Some would call it coincidence, but if you've ever knelt in the dark, begging for help you weren't sure would come, if you've ever held your breath, praying not for victory, but for one more sunrise, then you know, that wasn't chance. That was grace. And maybe tonight, someone you know is still caught in their own storm, still bleeding, still lost, still waiting for a Scout, or a Logan, or for God to send light through someone else's hands. If this story moved you, share it. If you believe in second chances, leave a comment below. If you carry faith in your heart, click subscribe and join